The history of our holy and divine religion in this new world is a truly beautiful and heroic story. What picture, indeed, can be more touching or more inspiring than that of our early Christian missionaries carving the fair sign of redemption on the tall forest trees, of our priests preaching beside their rustic altars to settlers and native tribes? I feel myself justified in saying that the early apostles of Maryland deserve a brilliant chapter in the history of Christian missions. Their zeal and fortitude, their devoted charity, their utter contempt of earthly comforts, their patience under wrongdoings and insults, their heroic conduct in the midst of dire hardships and great dangers, are worthy of the glorious men whose names are justly emblazoned in the histories of India, China, and Japan. The history of Maryland's founding is often told vaguely, as one of religious tolerance, but beneath that narrative lies a far more complex history, one not of tolerance, but of the complete persecution of its early Catholic settlers. From the missionary work of Father Andrew White, the Apostle of Maryland, to the martyrdoms which took place at the culmination of aggression at the Battle of Severn, we will take a closer look at the early history of Catholics in Maryland and what would lead to an eventual abandonment of the state's first capital of St. Mary's. Following the Protestant Reformation, England grew increasingly hostile towards Catholics. The penal laws imposed severe restrictions, banning the celebration of the Mass, imprisoning priests, and forbidding public Catholic worship. Amid this climate of persecution, the Jesuits, moved by a deep missionary calling and dedication to the salvation of souls, looked to the New World as a place of refuge and purpose. The colony of Maryland, envisioned by the Calvert family, presented a providential opportunity to create a Catholic community where they could freely practice their faith without fear of persecution. In this, the history of Maryland presents no better, no purer, no more sublime lesson than the story of the toils, sacrifices, and successes of her early missionaries. The Jesuits, moved by a profound zeal, were eager to imitate the great missionaries of the previous centuries and those living among them. Some wrote that in going to Maryland, they wished to imitate the glorious St. Francis Xavier. Some asked to go there in hopes of winning a crown of martyrdom. All wished to go that they might advance in the glory of God and procure the salvation of souls. "Whether I die by sea in my journey, or by land in Maryland," wrote Father Christopher Morris from Liege in 1640, "sure I am I shall have as good, yea more glorious a sepulchre than in Liege. The cause will ennoble the death. The inconveniences of the diet, apparel, and lodging will be made easy and supportable by the frequent memory of my Saviour's vinegar and gall, and nakedness, and hard bed of his cross." In the same letter, Father Morris said that he more highly esteemed the teaching of Christ's cross in all senses in Maryland to the most honorable chair either in Liege or in all of Europe besides. Father Andrew White, who among them would be known as the Apostle of Maryland, was the first to set sail aboard the Ark and the Dove, under the leadership of Governor Leonard Calvert. After navigating the Chesapeake Bay, they made their initial landing on St. Clement's Island, a remote wooded spot chosen for its seclusion and safety. It was here that Father White celebrated the first recorded Catholic Mass in what would become the English colonies, marking a moment of profound significance for the settlers and British North America. Following this, the group moved on to establish their settlement at St. Mary's, laying the foundations for Maryland's first state capital. With Father White saying, "On the day of the Annunciation of the Most Holy Virgin Mary, in the year 1634, We celebrated on this island the first Mass which had ever been offered up in this part of the world. After we had completed the sacrifice, we took upon our shoulders a great cross, which we shaped out of a tree, and advancing in order to the appointed place, with the assistance of the governor and his associates, and other Catholics, we erected a trophy to Christ the Savior, humbly reciting on our bended knees the litanies of the Holy Cross with great emotion. Upon arriving in Maryland, Father Andrew White immediately set himself to the spiritual care of not only the English settlers, but also of the native peoples, in particular the Piscataway Indians, the dominant tribe along the Potomac River. With the heart of a missionary, he sought their conversion to the Catholic faith, believing the salvation of souls to be the highest aim of the colony. He was received favorably by the Piscataway, who permitted him to preach and catechize among his people. In time, Father White baptized the entirety of the tribe, including their chief, marking one of the earliest instances of formal Catholic evangelization among Native Americans in the English colonies. Recognizing the necessity of communicating the truths of the faith in their native tongue, he studied their language carefully and composed a catechism in the Piscataway dialect, along with other devotional materials to instruct them in the teachings of the Church. It is a fact of history, admitted even by Protestant writers, that the Catholic founders of Maryland treated the Indians in the most humane, Christian-like manner. Among the English, great piety, fervor, and peace soon reigned among the inhabitants of St. Mary's. Many of the leading gentlemen there made the spiritual exercises according to the method of St. Ignatius and became exemplary Catholics. As for the Catholics, say the annual letters of 1639, the attendance on the sacraments here is so large that it is not greater among the faithful in Europe in proportion to their numbers. The most ignorant have been catechized, and the catechetical lectures have been delivered to the more advanced every Sunday. On feast days, they have been very rarely left without a sermon. The sick and the dying, who were numerous this year, and dwelt far apart, have been assisted in every way, so that not a single person has died without the sacraments. We have buried very many, but we have baptized a greater number. St. Mary's from 1634 and onwards saw immense growth. The Catholic faith was flourishing, and the colony became extremely prosperous, with many Protestants even coming from England to settle in St. Mary's, and subsequently converting to the Catholic faith. However, this came with much danger. As Father Tracy reflects, the infant colony of Maryland found itself surrounded on all sides by evils and dangers. The principal part of Lord Baltimore's followers, as Catholics, could hope for no help, no protection, no friendship from their Protestant parent country. They might well be thankful indeed to the rulers of that kingdom for being permitted to forsake without stripes and blows their ancestral homes and hearths, and their rich and broad domains. Their next-door neighbors, however, the Virginians, watched them with an eye of envy and hatred. The Indians who surrounded them in the beginning, for the most part, were friendly towards them, but how long could they really rely on the fickle friendship of those native warriors whose axe, as one of their chiefs truly said, was always in their hands? In 1641, due to the calumnies of the Protestant settlers, the Indians grew extremely hostile to all those who were not of their race, particularly Catholics. The war whoop of the fierce Susquehannocks could be heard almost within a bowshot of the capital of Maryland's settlement. Their light steps could be heard by attentive ears in all the encircling woods. At dusk, too, Their bark canoes could be seen by watchful eyes gliding silently among the tall reeds on the banks of St. Mary's River. Often, the flight of a frightened duck or the cry of a heron was the only signal given that the Indian foe was near. The missionaries, who had their headquarters at St. Mary's, shared in all the trials and hardships of the period. For a time, as they were mere prisoners and could not accomplish the sublime end for which they had come, they thought of removing from the capital to some place of more security, and in which, or from which, they could carry on their apostolic labors. The colony in these years briefly embodied a fragile peace between Catholics and Protestants under the landmark Act of Toleration of 1649, one of the first laws in the New World to protect the religious liberty of Catholics. Yet this peace was shattered as England itself descended into religious and political upheaval. After the execution of King Charles I in 1649 and the rise of the Puritan regime under Oliver Cromwell, Protestant influence surged with renewed aggression. Fleeing the Anglican-dominated Virginia colony, a group of militant Puritan settlers had earlier been granted refuge by the Catholic-led Maryland government. These refugees were permitted to settle on the banks of the Severn River, where they founded what would become Annapolis, under the condition that they would respect the religious liberty of others. However, once Cromwell's commissioners took power in England, these same Puritans seized control of the provincial government in 1654, abolishing the Toleration Act, outlawing the practice of the Catholic faith, and barring Catholics from civil office. Mass was forbidden, Catholic chapels shuttered, and the once promising experiment of a Catholic colony was replaced with open persecution. In response, Governor William Stone, loyal to the Lord Baltimore and the Catholic population, raised a force, mostly of Catholic militia, to restore lawful order. What followed would become the first armed conflict in British America, the Battle of Severn. On March 25, 1655, where 21 years prior, on the feast of the Annunciation of the Most Holy Virgin Mary, the state of Maryland was founded, the two forces met near the mouth of the Severn River near Annapolis. Governor William Stone, supported by a small band of Catholic and Royalist soldiers, launched an effort to reclaim the Catholic colony's rightful order. Opposing them stood the Puritan militia, entrenched and emboldened by the revolutionary spirit of Cromwell's England. Outnumbered and outgunned, the Catholic forces were quickly overwhelmed. After a brief but bloody skirmish, they surrendered under the promise of mercy, but that mercy was betrayed. In a display of cold cruelty, the Puritan victors condemned and executed several prisoners, among them Englishmen William Eltonhead, William Lewis, and John Legat, and a slave who was brought from Angola, John Pedro. They surrendered but were killed on account of their faith, making them potentially the first lay people in the colony to receive the crown of martyrdom. In the wake of the Battle of Severn, Protestant forces solidified their control over Maryland, and the colony founded to escape the Protestant Reformation was destroyed. St. Mary's City, once the thriving capital and Catholic center of British North America, began to wither under these new harsh laws. Public Catholic worship was driven underground, and many loyal Catholic families faced fines, imprisonment, and social exclusion. Over time, St. Mary's lost its political prominence, especially after the capital was moved to Annapolis in 1695 and the city gradually declined. Despite the persecutions that would follow, Maryland throughout the 18th century until today remains a stronghold of the Catholic faith. with Charles Carroll being the only Catholic representing Maryland to sign the Declaration of Independence, Baltimore becoming the first Catholic diocese in the United States, and the state largely remaining Catholic in many of its regions today, although this has been greatly diminished by Vatican II. Despite Vatican II, Southern Maryland, for example, up until Traditionis Custodes, had 7 traditional Latin Masses, which were subsequently suppressed by the Archdiocese of Washington, which is a testimony to the fervor and devotion still held in the region. We may affirm without fear of contradiction that St. Mary's County, in which St. Mary's City was located, is one of the most hallowed spots on this continent. As Mr. Bancroft said, it was at one time the only home of religious freedom in the wide world. It dedicated itself to the Virgin Mother, nearly all of its rivers and creeks, its farms and villages, its roads and woods, its hills have been placed under the protection of the saints and angels. The Mass bell has been heard for more than 2 centuries in all of its hamlets, and the clean oblation, which was foretold by the prophet, has been offered up in thousands of its devout old homes. It has been sanctified by the labors and sufferings of devoted missionaries, and by the faith and charity of a pious and truly Catholic people. Through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, may our faith continue here and have a complete restoration of the same Mass those pious colonists heard on that feast of the Annunciation, the traditional Latin Mass.